Hi, I'm Hallie Gardner, and I will confess that I'm not very excited about getting videoed for this testimony, but I did not want to miss an opportunity to testify to what the Lord has done in my life. In fact, recently, a new friend who is a new believer asked me my testimony. We were talking. I shared with her what I had grown up in and the life that I had as a kid, and she was shocked. She couldn't believe that I was where I am now and grew up the way that I did. And so I told her it is only because of Jesus, but it's good to remember what the Lord has done in our life, whether it seems like a lot or it seems like a little. I think it's important to testify. So I'm doing that on video just for Jesus. I grew up in a non-Christian home, and when I say non-Christian, I mean like bikers and parties and all the things that go with that, drugs. And so it was tumultuous, to say the least. The weekends were crazy, and during the week, things were more normal. I wouldn't say that I didn't have a good childhood. I loved my mom and my stepdad, and went to school and loved school, and my mom took good care of me, but it was definitely a different childhood. I think that I thought it was normal. I just thought everybody's parents did drugs. So I just didn't really think about that. And so I'm going to give you a couple of things, a couple of ways that I now looking back can see that the Lord was leading me to himself. And so the first time I have any memory of that, of I don't know, the Lord calling me to himself. And I actually didn't remember this until years and years and years later. We lived in a really small town, and I walked to the bus stop, and it really was a mile both ways, and in the snow and all of that. But I remember walking with this high school girl. I think she was a high schooler. It's fuzzy. I was probably 5. And I remember her talking to me about something seriously, and her dad was standing on their back deck as we were walking up this hill home, and he yelled to her to hurry, and she yelled, and I don't even know her name. I don't know her name. I can't remember what her face looks like, but years and years later, I remembered that she yelled, "Hey, Dad, I'm throwing seed." And obviously, as a 5-year-old, I didn't know what that meant. Even as a 10-year-old, I didn't know what that meant. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I realized that's what was happening. So I know that's kind of a random piece of my story, but to realize that the Lord was putting people strategically in my life, even then, is kind of a thread that is throughout my life. So my parents like to go on motorcycle rides, long motorcycle rides, and so to make that more convenient for them, they would drop us off at church on Sunday, and we went to this church. I have no idea what kind of church it was, what denomination. I don't even know the name of the church. I remember the pastor's name and his wife, and they would pick us up on the Joy bus. So my parents would drop us off, or they would pick us up. I don't even remember. It's all fuzzy. But I remember this big yellow bus coming with the words Joy Bus on it. And every Sunday we would go to church, and they would drive us back. We even went on a family camp without our family with the Joy Bus church, which would never happen today, but that's a different story. So we would go to this church, and again, I don't know. I know that the people were loving. I know that I felt something different there. I remember the Sunday school teacher one time saying, "Well, you have to love God more than you love your mom." And I was like, "No way, Jose. I can't do that. It's not possible." But just that, again, the Lord was using these people strategically placed in my life to draw me to himself. In high school, like I said, I lived in a small town where there is literally nothing to do, and everybody went to youth group. And so I did too, and we would play games and have fun, and the youth pastor's wife, her name was Terry, just decided to take an interest in me. I think she knew, she could see that my home life was not easy. And so they would have me over for dinner. They had me over for Thanksgiving sometimes. Every Sunday we had Bible study at their house. And it's through them that I learned about the Bible. It's through them that I learned about what a home looks like. I mean, there are countless things that they taught me. And so I went to a camp that summer, one summer. I think it was my summer before my 8th grade year. And they asked people to come forward. And I actually didn't go forward, but I prayed. And then when I got home, I prayed and asked the Lord into my life. And then I told my youth pastor, Florin, the next day that I had done that. And it was a huge, intense time of discipleship. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time, but they really poured into me and taught me so much. And they're the ones that encouraged me to go to a Christian college. I was not going to because I didn't have money for that, but they told me the Lord would provide, and that's where I ended up meeting Danny, which worked out pretty good. When I was 18 and I was at college, I had grown up with a stepdad, and I loved him very much. But I knew that I had a dad that I had never met. And, I had grown up with this family that was hard, even though I loved them and they were good to me. But I all those years had wished that I had grown up in a Christian family. I thought that would have really been fun and nice and easier, and kind of coveted that, really wanted that. When I was 18, I wrote a letter to my biological father. Through some circumstances, I found out where he was and wrote to him, and he ended up contacting me, and I met him. Actually, the day that he called me, he left a message on something called an answering machine. I don't know if you know what those are. He left me a message, and then the very next day, his mom, my paternal grandmother, came to visit me. And many of you have heard me say this before, but she brought me 18 presents that represented the 18 years they had not known where I was. And anyway, all that to say, I met this Christian family that I didn't know that I had. My dad and my stepmom, my grandmother, who has since gone to be with the Lord, aunts and uncles, all of whom were believers and who had been praying for me for years and years and years. And it even now overwhelms me to think about how I really wanted that. And I thought that's what I needed when I was young, that I needed Christian parents, and that would have made my life so much easier and I would have done better. And the Lord had that for me at a different time, and he showed me in such a crazy, miraculous way, and brought them into my life. And now I have a wonderful relationship with them, and I am so blessed to have known my grandma Betty, who was just the kindest, most thoughtful person ever, funny. And all that time, they were praying for me. In fact, one of my favorite parts to tell people is after a couple of years of this, so I met them when I was 18, new family, comes with a lot of hardship, but we figured it out, and Jesus is bigger than all of that, and I was so blessed to know them. Years and years later, I was at my Grandma Betty's sister's funeral. I don't have a chart for you, but I went to this funeral of an aunt, well, I guess, I don't know, her sister, my Grandma Betty's sister. I don't know what that makes her to me. But we were at her funeral, and in the back there was a whole bunch of books, and she was known for being a prayer warrior. Her name was Inez. And I went back to look at the books. I think I was holding a crying baby, actually. And so I was holding a crying child and looking through all these prayer journals that she had had. And there in one of them, in the 80s, it was from the 80s, it had my name written all over it because she had been praying. They didn't know where I was all that time, and so she had been praying for me. And again, just so overwhelmed that the Lord had used all these people strategically, even though I didn't know they were there, to pray for me, and then brought them into my life, and all to push me and make me see who he was. Yeah, it was overwhelming. And I even feel so humbled to tell you that part of my story, that God would do that for me. And even though I had wanted a Christian family all that time and thought that would make a huge difference, what I always share with people when I'm sharing my testimony is that path of bitterness was very clear to me. There were some things that were hurtful, obviously, through that time, some ways, some things that I don't think kids should have to live through, that I would never allow my kids to be a part of. And yet, and like I said, that path of bitterness was so clear to me that I could have just chosen to be really discouraged and mad and bitter about some of those circumstances. But the Lord's grace was bigger and better, and He allowed me to see that He would use those circumstances. And when I finally realized that I understood the darkness and the light in a way that I wouldn't have understood it if I had grown up in a Christian home, I was so thankful. The Lord allowed me to understand that I could be thankful for those circumstances growing up. And so I hope that encourages you. I hope you're encouraged to think about what the Lord has used in your life to bring you where you're at, and to have hope for the future that He will continue to bring people and circumstances in your life in the future to know Him more and to pursue Him more. The end.
Sorry.
No, you're right.